Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello everyone, and thank you for coming back to share your time and your space and your ears and your minds with me. Welcome back to my constant listener, and hello if you are a new listener. Welcome to Shaman's Way. This is our 70th podcast. That's quite astounding to me. When Doug and I started this journey, we didn't know where the progression was going to go, and there have been starts and stops along the way, but I really love the consistency of the podcast and the consistency of the newsletters and the consistency of the content on the site. And what I think I value the most is getting to know my listeners and my listeners getting to know myself as we discuss what to me is a very deep and very varied subject. I want to dedicate this milestone podcast to the father, son, and the masculine wound. There are plenty of resources available to people to look up different psychological and psychosocial studies and blogs, so on and so forth, written about the health of the masculine or the feminine. I wanted to address the masculine wound, but before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about father-son. I have some of the information that I'm going to give to you today, I already have given to you in my September 2017 newsletter. And this is about father-son. Now, I have an apprentice class that I share my knowledge and my time with, and that is going on this year. What we did was we studied the center stones of the medicine wheel. So some of the information I'm going to share with you, I've shared with my students. Father-son is the third stone in the center of the wheel. So it's east and south of the center stone. So the center stone is the void or chaos or the creator stone in that regard. Father-son provided light and energy to Mother Earth so she could create life and life takers, such as natural disasters, diseases, to simply but deadly infections. Without father-son, she would be barren. When Sun Bear traveled into the mystery of the wheel that I teach, the geode was what the stone was, the stone keeper for father-son. I think that geodes come in many shapes, forms, and they're mysterious, and I think that the sun in and of itself is quite a mysterious creation, not only because we haven't been able to get very good views of it up until the days of the beautiful satellites. I think that the moon always presented itself with more checks and balances. We could make out more of the shapes, more of the craters, and so we created a more, I think, detailed stories with respect to the aspects of Grandmother Moon. The sun in and of itself is still that mystery. We know that it is a star. I don't know if my ancestors knew it as a star, but it had a very central part of the relationship between humans, crops, and the world. We look at Stonehenge, and Stonehenge being the I think, the penultimate for many of the Celtic pagan community and many of the pagan community to witness the coming of the June 21st or the summer solstice sun. What I found out recently was that there was 3 kilometers away, they uncovered large holes in the ground where there were posts, and through careful reconstruction of the posts and how they were laid out, it was a wooden Stonehenge. And the celebration for Stonehenge, the rise of the long sun, the rise of the June 21st sun, there would be a celebration in stone, and stone representing from the medicine wheel. I know I'm talking about the Father Sun. I'll get there. So the stone representing that relationship to the ancestor, that relationship to something that always is. Stone is the First Nation. It is the wisdom keeper for all things. And during the day, the progression, the party would move towards the wooden sun wheel, the wooden Stonehenge. And it had an opening that corresponded directly with the descent of the summer sun. And the celebratory relationship between that day and between the celebratory relationship between humans and sun was demonstrated and is demonstrated by the amount of archaeological evidence they have found. Many, many pieces of bone, many, many pieces of, in regards to feasting, clay pots for cooking, probably for drinking. So there seemed to be a joyous celebration and a party that went on all night long and all day long, really. I mean, think about it. The long sun, the longest day of the year is a pretty freaking long day. And for those who live in the northern hemisphere, that day is forever and ever and ever, because the sun doesn't set for many days in a row. The sunflower is the plant guardian for Father Sun. And I don't know how this happened, but the information that I have on the sunflower is that it is associated, our ancestors associated with feelings of adoration, admiration, and platonic love. I never thought the sunflower that way. The sunflower to me is always the bringer of joy, or the bringer of light, and the seeds within that sunflower, the number of birds that were fed by it, the number of mice, the number of moles on the farm, the various creatures who loved that sunflower, and the ants who crawled up it, and the bees who settled on it. So for me, it really became a relationship between the strong sun and the strength of earth, and that forever giving over earth, or earth forever feeding itself, earth forever for being that for, what is the word I'm looking for? I know some of you are probably yelling it at me right now. Anyway, so it is that cyclical nature. The strong stem can be, it can be seen as bonds of loyalty and strength between people. Father Sun plays an important role in many myths and many cosmologies. He is the third on the wheel in honor of the different roles associated with sun. The shadow side of the bright side is war, and it is so close to the void, the center stone. We are still very close to chaos in the medicine wheel, that dance of creation and destruction. The personality of the sun, well, we have to understand that the personality of the sun has a direct relationship to the land that it shines upon. When I look through some of the stories with respect to the sun god or the sun goddesses in desert stories, it's a warring god, where in our West Coast myths, the sun had to be rescued by the raven. So we have very different relationships to sun. One where the sun is you're in constant danger of the sun. And in the West Coast where there is, lots of sun, but there are many days of rain, there are many days of cloud. So we would have to have a relationship to a spirit that would bring that sun back to us. And those myths were very real. Those myths are an integral part of our bones, regardless of where you come from, wherever your soul came from, wherever your DNA comes from, you have a relationship to the sun. As we walk the internal wheel, I think, the whole process of working with my class this year was moving into a deeper understanding of ourselves. So the masculine wound came from the process of the stones and where they sit on the medicine wheel in relationship to how our personalities are set in relationship to the void, the very creation of ourself. So as we looked at this, one of the Finnish god of sun and thunder was Ukka. And long ago, Ukka, the god of thunder, he looked down from the sky and smiled with satisfaction, for the people below were drinking toast to his pleasure, and this was springtime, and in springtime, the people of Finland celebrate the great god's gifts. I encourage you, if you love stories, to look up some of the Finnish tales, and they're what I share as a part of my ever-growing relationship to the wheel, and integrating stories is a really positive way of teaching and bringing the teachings of our ancestors forward so that we're forever steeped within the mystery and the magic of our ancestors. When I read stories about punishment for bad deeds, I find more stories punishing the female than the males. In all of our path of healing, we're often caught between the battle of the sexes. And many of the myths that I've studied in relationship to bringing our ancestors into our time and space is by telling the stories and the lessons. But we often see that our myths are stories between wars of gods and goddesses. The torture, the rape, and the subjugation of the female spirit has figured quite predominantly in our overculture. The spiritualized masculine is one end of the polarization and divorce of feminine from masculine, and matter from consciousness, which has been and still is harmful to our society and to our lives. So I want to talk about the shadow aspect of that in the relationship of the masculine wound. The father is equated in psychological terms with the development of consciousness, in that discriminating factor necessary to help us break out or differentiate from matter. So matter would be mother. I like the writings and the recordings of a Jungian analyst and author named Marie-Louise von France. And one of her teachings is the primary psychological task of the female is to relate to her animus, the masculine, and a man's his anima, so the feminine within. Father, in that regard, gives us a sense of perspective and the ability to see the bigger picture. A certain amount of father energy makes it easier for us not to be overwhelmed by our emotions. This doesn't mean, let me just say that the father is not about heart. He is. But the father is a different type of energy that is complementary to the feminine mother. He is the inner king of the child's psyche. And for the masculine, the anticipation of his own masculinity. So looking to the father for guidance, the boy or the masculine identified child sees the father as the man or the masculinized that they'll become. I think that one of the challenges we have of an entire generation or a large percentage of a generation growing up without fathers, there may be more challenge for embodying the masculinity, both in boys and I think in recognizing masculinity and feminine and recognizing positive masculinity to the female or to a woman or a woman in another form, transgendered, but the father represents order and structure, and I think that we have much unstructure and poor abilities to focus towards a goal, and I think that might be one of the setbacks from having the unfathered or no father within a family unit. The father also represents difference and otherness. He is the third. What I mean is he's not a part of the original two, the mother and the child. And it's very important to the healthy development of any child to know that they are not the central person in their mother's life, but father is there as well. So the child doesn't take on the parentified role, the child doesn't take on the lover role, not lover as in sexual assault or sexual abuse, but that intimacy of relationship. Father is a teacher in the world of things, thoughts, in the outer world. He helps a child find his way out of the forest and into the world. A good internalized sense of father is a sense of having wings and the ability to fly, symbolic of our spiritual natures. There's, the Icarus's father warned him not to fly too high, but was able to give him wings. And what Icarus did was, what Icarus does. And that's not my story. If the guidance of the father archetype is missing, I think there can be quite a bit of confusion. So there are father-hungry adults who have a tendency to be confused and have difficulty ordering their inner and outer lives, and by saying no. Now, I have had my children were not raised with a father. Their father and I separated when they were 1 and 2, and for the vast majority of their life, their only parent they had was myself. And I know that that really affected my daughter in many different ways, and it affected my son. And so when I talk about these things, I talk about them from my own perspective, as well as bringing in the perspectives of some of the writers like Marie-Louise von France that I really like, Marion Woodman being another one. I quite like some of the ideas of what the archetype is for the father and what is that inherent polarity. The father who unconditionally loves are present both physically and emotionally. They model empowerment, strength, protection, stability, emotional support, compassionate listening, and grounded guidance. So those are the traits of the divine father, the divine masculine. The father wound exists because most men are not able to father their children in that way. And as I described a little bit earlier, the father wound affects both daughters and sons. When the patriarchy oppresses women or female-identified people, it puts enormous pressure on men to be financially successful. We've heard this before. There's so much pressure to be successful, to be a provider, to be gentle and loving and emotional when needed, powerful and strong, protective when needed, the rock of the family. But most men do not receive that as role modeling. So some of them are unable to step into fatherhood in its most evolved and loving form. I think that if we look back into our cultural history, we have a generation of men returning from the Second World War, and then in some parts of the world we have the Korean War. I'm talking from a Western perspective because I know that the Korean War and the Vietnamese War, the Vietnam War, didn't affect or have the same emotional or psychological impact, say for Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Europe, those things. So I'm speaking from a North American man-centric perspective here. And I recognize that, and I want to let you know that I recognize that as well. So we have successive wars, and as we have successive wars and we have current wars going on, I think I can travel and I can track the shell shock to, battle weary, to PTSD, to how do you father children when you are in a place of such woundedness, and our society carries that woundedness. The genocide of the humans, the First Nations people in Canada, the genocide of the Australian Aborigines, the genocide of Aborigines in, I think, every culture, is also a masculine wound. It's a feminine wound, but it's a masculine wound because the perception that the males protect the community, the males are the warriors, not for every single one, I'm generalizing, and I recognize that. And I think that genocide affects and demoralizes their sons, and demoralizes our sons, and demoralizes their future sons and our future sons. The collective whole is made lesser because of the unrecognized, the unsolved, the little talked about father wound. Fathers, for the most part, are unable to love themselves unconditionally. I don't know very many people who can love themselves unconditionally. It is a process. It's a journey. It certainly isn't an event, at least not for most people. If we're unable to love ourselves unconditionally, it can be very challenging, if not impossible, for us to love our children unconditionally. And even among the most loving and kind fathers, we still find places where we give and take of our love based on behavior, based on expectations, etc., etc. We simply cannot give what we do not have. The mother wound is the core wound on the planet, and my next podcast is going to talk about that. But the father wound is its counterpart. In the patriarchal paradigms that we've been living under, there's extensive harm to both men and women from the lack of balanced, powerful, divine masculine. The father wound, it shows up in a wide range of spectrum, depending on what type of father was in your life. The spectrum ranges from the father who is always there in a two-parent home, to divorced family where the father was mostly absent, and everything in between. And of course, adoption, death, many other issues including alcohol abuse, physical and sexual abuse, drug abuse, only exacerbate the father wound. But even when there is a father still in the home, still together with the mom, and seemingly doing the best he can, his inability to full that male divine potential has a dramatic impact on the children. The way that your father treated your mother has a huge impact on your relationship with the opposite sex. And if you're a parent, your relationship with your children is also impacted. So these are some of the questions that you can ask yourself. Did your father cheat on your mother? Did your father disrespect your mother, calling her derogatory names? Was your father a bully, angry, or authoritarian? Was there true balance in the home, or was the dad the head of the household? Were his opinions valued more than your mother's? Did your father have an expectation that your mom's job was, in the traditional roles, right? Was your father disrespectful towards women? Did he comment on their bodies in front of you or others? Did he comment about your body or the clothes you wore? Did your father exude patriarchal beliefs by limiting your sexuality or trying to intimidate your boyfriends? They're just some of the questions that can identify, that can, bring you into understanding the relationship. Did your father leave most of the household responsibilities, including raising you, up to your mom? We are then moving towards the ever-present idea of forgive and move on. And this is the hardest task for anyone to complete. Forgiveness requires that you no longer hold on to any pain or residual feelings. This means that the pain can no longer be a crutch. It can no longer be an excuse for emotional outbursts or bad behavior. Forgiveness is a process. It's taking the opportunity to examine an event and release the energy that keeps us stuck. My grandmother explained forgiveness to me as the metaphor of a bucket full of water. She told me every day we get up, we get dressed, we go to the kitchen, we fill a bucket with water, we carry it. We don't need that bucket. We don't need the water in the bucket, but we fill it anyway. And if we're free to live a life free of encumbrances and unnecessary weight, we need to empty the bucket and set it down for good. I don't want it, I don't need it, and I'm not carrying it. When we forgive, part of us is saying it wasn't all right, that I was hurt. So when we forgive, it's not saying it's all right what happened. I'm not here to validate or unvalidate what happened to you. But it is what it is, and it was what it was. And how does this relate to the father wound? The father wound can give us or bring us to a place of forgiveness, first for ourselves. And then as we ask those questions about the masculine in our life, did the masculine fail you? Can you forgive that aspect? Can you recognize how, in what way you have and you hold your own masculine wound? These are important questions for you. The reality of forgiveness is, it can be very, very challenging for us. But one of the great injustices is not to heal, because the human body is designed to heal. The mind is designed to heal. Your emotions are designed to heal. Your spirit is designed to heal. And your soul is designed to heal. That's all it does, all the time. And forgiveness of the wound, forgiveness of the actions is a most important part of healing. It's the absolute most part. You can't authentically receive healing until you have forgiven others. You can receive some, and we get better, and what we refer to, but what we really want to get, but if we really want to get what we are here for, that it's that tangential part of ourselves, that aspect of ourself that isn't just core, but it's all the aspects. So when you came into this world, when you were born, you were perfect. And everything after that moment when you were born is called acquired. All negative emotions are acquired. They were learned. There is also the discussion of the ancestral wound. There's also the discussion of transference, what we don't remember or make conscious. We often act out, often evoking or dreaming up the external field around us to collude with us so as to give us living shape and form to our internal process. Whatever we repress, deny, or split off from, we tend to unconsciously and compulsively reenact in the present, if we are unknowingly trying to complete an incomplete process. We will project outside of ourselves and transfer onto others unconscious parts of ourselves, dreaming them up to play certain roles so as to help us actually recreate and act out our inner unconscious process in full embodied form as an unconscious way of seeking resolution. Paradoxically, these enactments are simultaneously the problem as well as our attempt to solve it. Transference is a channel for repetition compulsion of the traumatized soul to unwind itself through the vehicle of relationship. And on that note, I will leave you with a fond farewell, because I believe our time in this discussion has come to a close. And I thank you for being a part of this discussion. I think as we move through this time, this space, and this place, and we contemplate on Father-Son and the relationship of Father-Son to Grandmother Moon and to Mother Earth, then we contemplate our relationship to the void, to the chaos, to that masculine, the anima and the animus within us. What is that animus trying to tell me to do? How can I bring forward the positive divine masculine, the divine father? If you have a poor relationship with your physical father, perhaps seek out information or seek out journeys to see if you can find your spirits to bring you to a divine father, to bring you to an unwounded or the uncompromising, unconditionally love father. And experience what that energy feels like. I encouraged my students to do that, and I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to seek out spiritual relationships that can teach us and transfer the positiveness of that relationship into the physical so we can manifest it out towards the people who we really wish to share this with, and some that maybe we don't wish to share it with, but forgiveness can play a role in that. Forgiveness of the self. How do we forgive? There are many resources on forgiveness. I think there's even an institute that is dedicated to forgiveness. I strongly encourage you to find ways, to find journeys, to release yourself from the burden. Remember, you don't want it, you don't need it, you don't have to carry it. We make choices. We are wounded, and our wounding really does affect how we perceive the world, how we move through the world, how we bring the world into ourselves even. And you're here on podcast number 70, and my constant listeners, some of you have been around since podcast number 1, and we've talked about digging deep into the soil of self, digging deep into the soul of self. We have to look at the ugly parts. I have to recognize that my father failed me, my biological father failed me, and I failed both of them as well, because of my relationship to that masculinity. I really appreciate your time, and I am blessed to be in this space, in this place, sharing my wisdom. Thank you for listening to my tangents, and I try to get back to the story. I look forward to your emails, your comments, and I look forward to the next time we meet. Until then, have a most blessed time.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.